A sitting member of Congress is indicted on 3 federal felony counts for allegedly assaulting, resisting, and impeding federal officers under Title 18, United States Code, Section 111. 2 of those counts carry a maximum of 8 years each. Together, the indictment exposes Representative LaMonica McIver to as much as 17 years in a federal prison. The conduct at the center of that indictment lasts less than a minute. It happens outside a detention facility in Newark, New Jersey, in front of federal body cams and a dozen cell phones. Here's the part the court record can't smooth over. On that exact afternoon, at that exact gate, federal agents arrest one other public official, the mayor of Newark. 13 days later, prosecutors walk into a courtroom and drop his charge entirely. A federal judge calls the arrest embarrassing. The mayor is free by the end of the month. The Congresswoman is not. More than a year later, she still has not stood trial.
By the end of this, you'll understand why the same U.S. Attorney's Office that dropped the mayor's case in 13 days took a member of the House of Representatives all the way to a grand jury. And why, as of summer 2026, that decision sits in front of a federal appeals court instead of a jury. The answer runs through a $1.2 billion contract, 60 seconds of body cam footage, and one legal question that could decide whether a member of Congress can be prosecuted for what happens during an oversight visit.
Keep the mayor in mind. His 13 days matter more than they look. Start with the building. Delaney Hall sits on Doremus Avenue in Newark's Industrial East Ward, a low brick complex in the shadow of the port. For years it stood mostly empty. In 2025, it reopens as the largest immigrant detention center in the Northeast, 1,000 beds, run not by the government directly, but by a private corporation. The operator is the GEO Group, one of the 2 largest private prison companies in the country. According to reporting on the contract, ICE and GEO strike a 15-year deal worth roughly $1.2 billion. Detainees start arriving at the beginning of May 2025. 1,000 beds, 15 years, more than $1 billion. In a city whose mayor and congressional delegations say they were never given straight answers about what was happening inside. That's the second fact that doesn't fit. Under federal law, members of Congress have the authority to inspect ICE detention facilities, and the appropriations language backing that authority says they can do it without advance notice. The whole point is the surprise. An announced inspection is a staged one. So, on May 9, 2025, 3 House Democrats from New Jersey arrive at Delaney Hall to use that authority in person. Representative LaMonica McIver, Representative Bonnie Watson-Coleman, and Representative Rob Menendez. Here's why that lineup matters. McIver is not a career fixture. She wins her seat in a special election in September 2024, succeeding Donald Payne Jr. in New Jersey's 10th district after his death. She is, in congressional terms, brand new, months into the job when she walks up to that gate. Watson-Coleman is a veteran in her 70s. Menendez carries one of the most recognizable names in New Jersey politics. 3 members of Congress, 1 detention center, and a private operator with $1 billion reason to control who sees what. Outside the facility, there's also a protest. And there's the mayor of Newark, Ras Baraka. Baraka is not a bystander. He's been one of the loudest local opponents of Delaney Hall's reopening, and Newark has been fighting the facility on a second front too, code and permit inspections, the city arguing GEO reopened without proper local approvals. So when the mayor shows up at the gate on May 9th, he arrives at the center of a dispute already sitting in the courts. He wants in. Whether he's allowed past the line is exactly the question the whole day turns on. Now, hold that thought.
Because what happens next takes under a minute, and every second of it is on camera. The delegation is on the property. Baraka is at or near the gate. At some point, federal officers, Homeland Security Investigations agents, the criminal investigation arm that works alongside ICE, decide the mayor has crossed a line he isn't permitted to cross, and they move to arrest him for trespassing. That decision is the spark. Around the arrest, bodies compress. Members of Congress, agents, and the mayor collapse into a tight shoving knot within seconds. What happens in that knot is the entire federal case. Watch how thin the ledge is here. Two versions of the same 60 seconds. According to the government's allegations, McIver slammed her forearm into the body of an HSI agent and forcibly grabbed him as officers tried to take Baraka into custody. That's the conduct prosecutors will later carve into 3 separate felony counts. McIver's account is the opposite in meaning, if not in footage. She says she was trying to protect the mayor, that she was telling officers to get your hands off of us. Same shoving, same bodies, same tape. 2 readings that lead to 2 different endings, a felony or a Tuesday. The agents take Baraka. He's arrested for trespassing and held. According to reporting, he's detained for roughly 5 hours before he's released. The Congresswoman is not arrested that day. She goes home. For a little while, it looks like the mayor is the story. Remember his 5 hours. They're about to become the most important number in the whole case because of how fast they evaporate. 13 days after the arrest, the trespassing charge against Baraka is dismissed. Not fought and lost, dismissed by the government's own hand. And when it comes apart in public. The federal magistrate judge handling it, Andre Espinoza, doesn't let the prosecutors leave quietly. He calls it a hasty arrest, followed swiftly by the dismissal of these trespassing charges a mere 13 days later, and tells the U.S. Attorney's Office the sequence suggests a worrying misstep by your office. He urges them to operate with a higher standard. The word that sticks to the whole episode is one he reaches for directly. Embarrassing. Think about the position that leaves the office in. A federal judge has just told them on the record that one of their 2 arrests from May 9th doesn't hold up. So the obvious question, the one you're probably already asking, is why the same office, staring at the same afternoon and the same judicial rebuke, doesn't just let the whole thing go. It does the opposite. The U.S. Attorney is Alina Habba. She is the interim U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey, appointed under President Trump, and before that, one of his personal attorneys. On the same track that drops the mayor's case, her office moves against McIver. First, a criminal complaint. Then, in June 2025, a federal grand jury returns an indictment, 3 counts, all under Section 111, the statute that makes it a federal crime to assault, resist, oppose, impede, intimidate, or interfere with a federal officer performing their duties. In Habba's own words, McIver assaulted, impeded, and interfered with law enforcement. The mayor's 5 hours are gone. The Congresswoman's 17 years are on the table. That's the collision this whole video sits on. One scene, 2 officials. One walks in 13 days with a judge's apology ringing behind him. The other is charged with felonies that outlive the year. Here's a line I'll only cross once, and I'll cross it now because the record forces the question. Whatever you believe happened in that 60 seconds, a justice system that measures the same afternoon so differently for the mayor and the Congresswoman is telling you something about who it decided to pursue. That's not a verdict on guilt. It's an observation about choice. Prosecution is a choice. Somebody made it twice, in opposite directions, on the same day.
You might be thinking this is just politics, that a Republican-appointed prosecutor charged a Democratic Congresswoman, and everyone can guess the rest. Hold that thought, because McIver's own lawyers make a version of it the centerpiece of her defense, and a federal judge has to decide whether it's a legal argument or just a grievance. That fight is where the case actually lives. McIver pleads not guilty. At her arraignment in June 2025, she rejects all 3 counts, and her defense rests on 2 pillars. The first is the Constitution. Her attorneys invoke the Speech or Debate Clause, the provision in Article 1 that protects members of Congress from being prosecuted for their legislative acts. The argument is direct. An oversight inspection of a federal detention facility is a legislative act. If a member of Congress can be indicted for what happens during a lawful inspection, the protection means nothing. The second pillar is selective and vindictive prosecution. The claim that Haba's office targeted McIver for political reasons, that this charge exists because of who she is and what she was doing there, not because of a genuine assault. 2 arguments. One says, you cannot charge me for this. The other says, you would not have charged me for this if I were anyone else. The government's answer is narrower and harder to wave away because of it. Prosecutors argue that the Speech or Debate Clause protects legislating, speeches, votes, committee work, the gathering of information for those ends. It does not, they say, license physical contact with a federal officer. You can inspect, you cannot, in their telling, put your forearm into an agent. Whatever the tape shows, the government's position is that a shove is not a speech, and a grab is not a debate. So the entire billion-dollar fight over Delaney Hall, the contract, the beds, the oversight, the protest, the mayor's 5 hours, funnels down to a single legal question a judge now has to answer. Is a hands-on moment during an oversight visit a legislative act or a federal crime? The judge assigned to answer it is Jamel K. Semper, a U.S. District Judge in New Jersey. On November 13, 2025, he answers. He rejects the immunity argument. In a decision reported to run 41 pages, Judge Semper declines to throw the case out on speech or debate grounds. His reasoning tracks the government's line. The clause shields legislative acts, and the physical conduct alleged in the indictment falls outside that shield. He does not rule that McIver is guilty of anything. That's not what a motion to dismiss decides. He rules that the case can proceed, that a jury, not a pretrial motion, has to sort out what those 60 seconds were. A trial that had been eyed for November 2025 doesn't happen. The motions swallow the calendar. Then, on January 5, 2026, Semper issues a further ruling touching the 3rd count. The 3-count structure holds. Every avenue the defense tried to end the case before a jury ever sees the footage is closed off one by one. For McIver, that's the worst possible outcome short of a conviction. It means the tape is going to a jury. It means 17 years stays real. And it means the only move left is to go over the district court's head. So she does. On December 29, 2025, her team files notice with the 3rd Circuit Court of Appeals, the federal appellate court that sits over New Jersey, signaling she will fight the district court's rulings on both motions, the legislative immunity denial and the selective prosecution claim. It's an unusual posture. Most defendants can't appeal until after a conviction, but immunity questions like speech or debate are the kind of issue that can sometimes be tested before trial, precisely because the whole point of the protection is not having to stand trial at all. If the appeals court agrees the clause covers her, there's no jury, no verdict, nothing. If it doesn't, the footage goes to Newark's 12 jurors and the 17 years comes back into full view. Now return to the mayor the way I said we would. because his 13 days aren't just a contrast, they're evidence in her case. Baraka doesn't only walk, he sues. He brings a civil action against Alina Habba, alleging false arrest and malicious prosecution, the claim that the government hauled him in for political reasons and had no real case. And Judge Espinosa's words from the dismissal, hasty, embarrassing, a worrying misstep, become exactly the kind of judicial finding a plaintiff wants in his corner. The mayor turns his 5 hours into a lawsuit against the prosecutor.
The Congresswoman, standing feet away in the same scrum, is fighting to stay out of prison. Same gate, same agents, same afternoon. One is a plaintiff, one is a defendant. The only thing that changed between them was whose case the office decided to keep. That's the fact McIver's selective prosecution argument is built on, and it's why Espinosa's rebuke echoes so far past the mayor's little courtroom. When her lawyers stand in front of the Third Circuit and argue she was singled out, they don't have to reach for a theory. They can point at the same day and the same office and the 13 days it took to let the other guy go. And here's the detail the indictment's announcement doesn't dwell on. This is not a stranger off the street. Section 111, the assault on a federal officer statute, is the government charging a sitting member of the legislative branch over conduct that happened while she was exercising an oversight power the legislative branch wrote into law to check the executive branch. The people who run the detention facilities answer, in theory, to the people who fund them. On May 9th, one of the funders walked up to the gate. What the case tests underneath the shoving is which branch gets to decide what happens when she does. Now, the second question you probably have by this point: doesn't the body cam just settle it? There's footage. Federal officers were wearing cameras. Phones were rolling. Shouldn't 60 seconds of video simply show who did what? It shows motion. That's the problem. Everyone in that knot agrees bodies collided. The dispute isn't whether contact happened, it's what the contact was. The government reads a forearm driven into an agent and a hand that grabbed him. The defense reads a woman pressed into a scrum of officers arresting the mayor, saying, "Get your hands off us." Video captures the geometry. It doesn't tell you the intent behind it. And Section 111 turns almost entirely on that word the tape can't speak. Whether the contact was forcible and deliberate, or the physics of 5 people crushed into a doorway. That's why this ends in front of a jury or an appeals court, and never got resolved at the gate itself. Which brings the whole thing to where it actually sits as of summer 2026. There's no verdict. There's been no trial. The woman charged with 3 federal felonies more than a year ago hasn't had her day in front of 12 people, because the fight over whether she can even be tried has climbed to a higher court. In June 2026, the matter is before the Third Circuit. The mayor's case has been over for more than a year. Hers is still, in every legal sense, just beginning. Sit with the arithmetic one more time. 13 days to dismiss the mayor. More than 400 to keep the Congresswoman in front of a court and counting. 2 officials, 1 gate, 1 minute of tape, and a gap between their fates you can measure in years. There's one more number worth holding. Through all of it, the complaint, the indictment, the arraignment, the 41-page opinion, the appeal, LaMonica McIver keeps her seat. She's a voting member of the United States House of Representatives, casting votes on the floor in Washington while she is, at the same moment, a criminal defendant facing 17 years over a detention center in her own district. There's no rule that removes her. An indictment is not a conviction, and the Constitution she invoked to try to end the case is the same one that lets her keep serving until a jury says otherwise. So that's where the file rests tonight. 1,000 beds on Doremus Avenue, still open.
A $1.2 billion contract still running. A mayor who turned 5 hours into a lawsuit. A magistrate's word, embarrassing, that never stopped ringing. And a member of Congress who walked up to a gate to do the one thing the law says she's allowed to do, and is still, more than a year later, waiting to find out whether doing it was a crime. The tape is 60 seconds long. The argument over what it means may outlast the building it was filmed in front of, and the port that stands behind it.